I am Tessa Updike, and I am the archivist for the Citadel. So in just a moment, we will share the screen so we can jump into our presentation. But I'd like to encourage everyone attending to please feel free to submit any questions you have in the Q&A section of our Zoom webinar. And at the end of this presentation, time permitting, I will be happy to answer some of your questions. And I'd like to thank our library director, Aaron Weimer, for being our tech guru for this evening's program. And so Aaron is going to share his screen so we can get started. The title of this evening's talk is 181 Years of Women at the Citadel. 181 years. I often hear people say that women have only been at the Citadel for the past 30 years or so, but women have really been a part of this college since it was established. So who were these women? What roles did they play? How did they influence the institution over time, and how were their lives influenced by the Citadel? I recently read a memoir by the renowned artist Ai Weiwei titled 1,000 Years of Joys and Sorrows. The title came from poetic verses that Ai Weiwei's father wrote while visiting the ruins of an ancient city along the Silk Road. He wrote, "Of 1,000 years of joys and sorrows, not a trace can be found." When we're looking at the history of an institution and searching for evidence of women who were here before us, what traces can be found? What form do they take? Who created them? And whose perspective are we seeing them through? I have been the archivist for the Citadel for 6 years. Over this time, in addition to the many roles that my position includes, I have been collecting evidence or traces of women from our collections. That evidence is sometimes uncovered from deliberate research and sometimes discovered by surprise while I'm searching for something else. The evidence takes many different forms. It could be an entry in a diary or a letter, a photograph, a newspaper article, or sometimes just one name in a record. For each, there are opportunities for further research and for more complete stories to be told. These are stories of mothers, grandmothers, wives, girlfriends, students, faculty, staff, and administrators. Some are heartwarming, some are humorous, and some are painful. I hope that this presentation inspires you to join us in learning more about women at the Citadel and in working with us to share their stories. There is much, much more to discover and so many more stories for us to hear. So tonight, I am going to start at the beginning. The Citadel was established in December of 1842, and classes began in the spring of 1843. The original Citadel had 2 locations, the Citadel Academy in Marion Square, downtown Charleston, and the Arsenal Academy in Columbia. Of our earliest college publications, we have the cadet regulation booklets. These describe everything from admissions information to cadet uniforms, academic classes, exams, grades, discipline, and how to keep your room neat and clean. Looking at the 1845 regulation booklet, we have 2 references that allude to women. The first is item number 18, which states, "No married person will be appointed a cadet, and if any cadet should be married while in the academy, he shall leave the institution." And so it's interesting that this reference to women is actually a reference to the absence of women. The second is item number 90, which states, "Cadets must prepare their clothes for the laundress. before 7 o'clock on Sunday and Thursday of each week. And so while the student body was entirely young men and the faculty and staff were male, we know that the role of washing clothes was taken by women. When we need details on who was at an institution over time, if we can find financial records, we will usually find some interesting clues. These records are from our 1853 Board of Visitor meeting minutes and outline spending at the college that year. There are two lines here that are interesting to us. In 1853, the Citadel paid $1,304 for washing and $1,449 to hire servants. So what does that mean? The money for washing is most likely for laundry. At this time, the Citadel did not have in-house facilities for laundry, and so the clothes would have been picked up from school, washed off-site, and then returned. In these early years, the word servant could have meant an enslaved or free person of color, or also sometimes a white person. Archival records on African-American workers at the Citadel for the 1800s through the early 1900s are scarce, but through various records and newspaper advertisements, we know that Black laborers were present at the Citadel as early as 1843. The Citadel is a member of an international consortium called University Studying Slavery, which was started by the University of Virginia. We joined in 2017, and through this project have been researching the founding and early years of the Citadel and its connections to slavery. The director of the Citadel's University Studying Slavery project is Dr. Felice Knight, an assistant professor of history. John B. Patrick was born in Barnwell County in about 1832. He graduated from the Citadel in the class of 1855 and then moved to Columbia to teach at the Arsenal Academy. Patrick was secretary to the Board of Visitors and taught in Columbia through the Civil War. We have in our archives diaries that Patrick kept during the war. In this entry, written September 1st, 1862, he wrote, "Some days ago, I learned that a Negro girl that I have hired for the past year was for sale. And as I desired to purchase her, I wrote to ascertain the terms upon which she could be bought. This afternoon, I received the desired information and at once replied that I would buy. I am to give $1,000 for her. A good price, but not too much, I think, as she is a good cook and an excellent laundress." And so this is one piece of evidence that faculty members purchased and owned enslaved people in these early years. And in this case, the role of the laundress is given to this enslaved woman. Patrick's diaries are available to read on our digital collections website, and so you can find those online. And so where are other places that women appear in Citadel history in the early 19th century? For a glimpse into what it was like to be a cadet in Charleston in the 1850s, we can look to the diary of Thomas Hart Law, who was a member of the class of 1859 and whose diary was published in 1941. Nearly every night, Tom had invitations to dinners and parties at Charleston homes, at which he socialized with young women. Many of his diary entries describe accompanying young ladies to dances, to church, and to concerts. He writes that he was melancholy when his female friends were out of town, and he mentions exchanging smiles with ladies he meets in the hopes of spending more time with them. In an entry from May 8th, 1857, Law wrote of a party he attended, "It was not many minutes before I was in a situation, a more pleasant one than which I could scarcely conceive, seated on the sofa with Miss Ida by my side. That place I did not leave except to get closer. I did enjoy myself most agreeably. There was hardly a moment passed without one of us talking, and that with her who suits so much my fancy. Though we had not such a lively, frolicsome time as has frequently been our lot this year, I could scarcely get to sleep. The next night, the ladies he visited had clearly heard of his time with Miss Ida, as he was greeted at the door of their home with what he described as a most unusually strange welcome, which was, "I am not at all glad to see you, sir." Tom Law became a reverend and married one of those young ladies from his cadet years, Anna Adger. They both lived into their 80s and died 4 years apart in the 1920s. At the end of the Civil War in 1865, the Citadel was closed and taken over by federal troops, and the Arsenal Academy in Columbia was burned by Sherman's troops and closed forever. The Citadel in Charleston reopened in 1882. Walter Oswald Rivers, known as Ossie to friends and family, was born in Walterboro, South Carolina in 1871. He entered the Citadel in 1888 and was a member of the Calliopean Literary Society and chairman of the German Club. In his junior year in 1890, Ossie Rivers came down with a fever while at school and was taken to his father's home in Walterboro, where he died on June 19th. In an article written by the Post and Courier that year, we read this: "The recent cases of fever at the Academy, which resulted in the death of 4 cadets, was thoroughly discussed at the board meeting. The special report of the examining committee was read, and the members of the board made personal observations on the premises. The board decided to improve the system of sewage now in use at the Academy and thoroughly cleanse the cisterns from which part of the supply of water is obtained." And so Ossie Rivers, along with 3 of his classmates, died as a result of sewage contamination in their drinking water at the Citadel. Of Ossie Rivers, his obituary says, "The class of 1891 has lost one of its brightest and most popular members. He is described as a good soldier, faithful student, and generous and open-hearted friend." In our archives, we have a small collection of letters from Ossie Rivers to his family while he was a cadet. In that collection, there is an essay that he wrote titled "Man's Attachment to His Mother," in which he says of a home with a mother, "While she lived there, there was a place that he felt was home. There was one place where he felt he would always be welcome, one place where he would be met with a smile, one place where he would be sure of a friend." On the last page of this essay, there is a note at the bottom that appears to be written with emotion by his mother. It reads, "We shall meet in heaven, Ossie darling. Angel of death, ye cannot then my heartstrings rend apart. I shall hold my boy forever, and I close to my yearning heart." We have part of this collection digitized and available through our digital collections website, and so you can find Ossie Rivers' letters online. This image of laundry workers at the Citadel is one of the earliest known images of African-American workers on campus. The clothing and machinery in the image indicate that it was taken between 1890 and 1905. Through 1865, the Citadel paid for washing to be done off campus. In 1882, when the school reopened, the Citadel's Board of Visitors meeting minutes mentioned that the school was in need of its own laundry facilities. In 1900, a comparative statement was done to estimate the cost of keeping laundry as a contract where clothes were sent out to be washed and having laundry done on-site by Citadel staff. From that comparison, it was decided that the school would establish their own laundry facilities, and that plant was installed in the Marion Square location in 1902. When the Citadel moved from Marion Square to its current location along the Ashley River in 1922, the temporary powerhouse that was built included a laundry facility. These are drawings from 1921 of that building. You can see that the space was segregated by race and gender, with a restroom for the engineer, who was presumably a white man, and then restrooms labeled as colored men and colored women for the Black staff members. And we'll talk more about race at the Citadel as we move forward. Carolyn, or Carrie Amelia Nation, who was born in Kentucky in 1846, was a radical member of the temperance movement, which opposed alcohol before prohibition became law. Nation was known for attacking establishments that served alcohol with a hatchet, and later in life was sometimes called Granny Hatchet. She claimed a divine ordination to promote temperance by destroying bars. In the cadet letter collection in our archives for Robert Emmett Gribben, class of 1906, we found a newspaper article that Robert sent to his family in November of 1906. In the accompanying letter, Robert wrote, "I will send a clipping from Sunday News, which, with the expulsion of a cadet that day, caused quite a stir." In the envelope, he included this clipping titled, "She Assaulted a Cadet." The article reads, "Carrie Nation struck a cadet from the South Carolina Military Academy in King Street yesterday because he was smoking a cigarette. The Kansas whirlwind did not give the young soldier time to defend himself, for she caught him off his guard and landed a blow squarely in his face. The boy staggered and fell back, but his companions picked him up before he could hurt himself on the pavement." The cadets' classmates, after their initial shock, burst into laughter. Miss Nation lectured them on the evils of tobacco and then went to a nearby grocery store to be sure that they were not selling alcohol. And the cadets disappeared as soon as her attention was diverted from them. Inez Beatrice Perry was born to Irish parents in 1877. Her father died 6 years after her birth, and Inez lived with her widowed mother and sister, Susie, who was a stenographer for an insurance company. Inez became the librarian for the Citadel in 1909 and was one of the first women to have a professional staff position at the college. Unfortunately, she died in 1925 at age 47 of tuberculosis. Cadets of the senior class of 1920 wrote a tribute to Miss Perry in their yearbook. They wrote, "There is no one at the Citadel that makes such a profound impression as does Miss Perry. She always has a friendly word and she is willing to lend a helping hand. Her kind advice has frequently helped a cadet at the Citadel." Florence Jenny Gask was born in 1876 in Marion County, South Carolina. She graduated from the Roper School of Nursing and joined the Citadel as a registered nurse and matron of the Citadel Hospital from 1910 to 1929. In 1922, when she was 46 years old, her sister, Mary Elizabeth, died, and Florence adopted her 5 children, 2 boys and 3 girls, aged 4 to 18. The senior class of 1920 wrote a tribute to Miss Gask in their yearbook. They wrote, "Miss Florence Gask, registered nurse in charge of the infirmary, has endeared herself to us with her patience and care in rendering medical attention, and also by her cheering words in time of sickness and distress. She has ably discharged her duties, and it was largely due to her untiring devotion to her work that the death loss during the flu epidemic in the fall of 1918 was kept so low. Miss Gask has done much for each and every one of us, and there is not a cadet in school who does not appreciate her." Between the fall of 1918 and the spring of 1919, 6 cadets died due to Spanish influenza outbreak. Florence Gask died November 14th, 1947, at 70 years old in Henderson County, North Carolina. Fanny Chapman was matron of the Citadel's mess hall from 1910 to 1919. At the time, it was common for married women to be listed in records and publications under the names of their husbands. In Citadel publications, Fanny Chapman's name was displayed as Mrs. J.P. Chapman. So to find Fanny, we first needed to find her husband. Searching genealogical databases, we found a Joseph P. Chapman, who was an engineer working for the Citadel around 1910. When we saw that his wife, Fanny, was listed in Charleston city directories as a matron, we knew that we had found the right woman. Through records from Mr. Chapman, we learned that Fanny's maiden name was Lowry and that she was born around 1851 in Maryland. A brief obituary in the Baltimore Sun dated March 1st, 1920, told us that Fanny Chapman died on February 29th of that year at the home of her cousin, Mrs. Charles R. Webster in Baltimore, Maryland. Joseph P. Chapman had passed before her. In the Citadel's 1914 Sphinx yearbook, Mrs. Fanny Chapman is called Aunt Fanny by cadets and described as she who gives the touch of home life by her presence in the mess hall. The Citadel moved from its original location in Marion Square to its current campus along the Ashley River in 1922. In the 1920s and 30s, a number of young men from China attended college in the United States as beneficiaries of a program financed by the Boxer Rebellion Indemnity Fund. Students from China came to the Citadel and were befriended when they arrived in Charleston by a woman named Laura Bragg. Miss Bragg was the first female director of the Charleston Museum, and she was passionate about Chinese history, culture, politics, and language. It is because of Miss Bragg that we know so much about these Chinese students who wrote letters to her while they were cadets and many when they left the Citadel. Upon her death in 1978, the Citadel received these letters from her estate, and we have them in our archives. From the letters, we learn that some of the students from China were married, but they decided not to tell the Citadel because a requirement of being a cadet was that they be single and not have dependents. So imagine being a young man so far from home and in a new and different culture, not only missing your spouse, but also feeling that you couldn't even talk about your feelings because no one knew that you were married. In one letter, a student told Miss Bragg that he thought people may despise him if they knew he was older than 20, and that he would be treated differently if others knew he was married. Another cadet confided in Miss Bragg about his marriage and how worried he was about his wife, who was unwell and being cared for by family in China. Before we leave the early 20th century, I'd like to look at two more cadet diaries. Roy Warren Wunson was in the Citadel's class of 1902. He was born in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and was the first cadet to attend the Citadel from Massachusetts. His cadet diaries are currently being transcribed by a staff member in our archives, and I'd like to share just one entry with you in which Wunson writes about women and bachelor life. So this is from December 22nd, 1900. Whatever may happen, I will always remember with pleasure my Citadel school days. For when I have graduated, the unpleasant experiences will be eliminated, and only those pleasant reveries will remain to comfort my business trials or to be with me in my family joys. I say family joys because as I am the last of the family and upon me devolves the necessity of keeping before future generations the name of Wunson. I am going to try, however, a few years of bachelor life to see if it has all the pleasure and troubles that are ascribed to it. I love all the girls, though, far too much to ever enjoy single blessedness for long, but will soon take upon myself the state of double cussedness. Wunson moved back to Gloucester upon his graduation and remained a bachelor for 10 more years until his marriage to Marie Augusta Hammond in 1913. He served in World War I and died in 1942 in Massachusetts at the age of 58. Alan Jones was a member of the Citadel's class of 1938. We have a diary in our archives that he kept as a sophomore in 1936. Many of his entries are about young women who he meets at parties, and I'll share just a few lines. In one, he writes, And girls, there must have been a million of them. Tall girls, short girls, pretty girls, and girls not so pretty. Let's see, who did I dance with first? I just don't remember. But I do remember that I was first to dance with Ham Long's girl, Helen Player. He had asked me to break on him without an introduction since she didn't know anyone else there. And I did. Boy, I was crazy about her too. Dick White went as far as to say that she was the cutest girl on the floor, a statement that I cannot deny. She's the girl, incidentally, that Arlo told me to be sure and look up. I met Wilson's girl, who was nice too. Marshall's date from Washington didn't impress me as much as she did the next day at the tea dance and mess hall. My girl, Margaret Virginia Smith, was there too, and of course, I danced with her a lot. In 1935, the Citadel published an etiquette guide titled Customs and Courtesies that included detailed descriptions on how to approach, speak to, and assist women. And so I'll share just a couple of short excerpts. In a section called Attitude Toward Women, the guide said, "Nothing so quickly discloses the presence or absence of breeding in a man as does his attitude toward women. The true gentleman has the view that women deserve a special consideration and protection. It is his constant aim to shield them from unpleasant or embarrassing situations, to assist them when confronted with danger or hardship, and on all occasions, so to conduct himself as will contribute most to their pleasure and happiness." In a section called Calling to Ladies, the guide says, "One should never whistle or call to a woman or otherwise attempt to attract her attention from a distance greater than that appropriate for an ordinary conversation." In a section called Assisting Strangers, the guide said, "It is always proper for a man to offer his services to a lady, even though unknown to him, who appears to be in need of assistance. In no circumstances, however, should he take the slightest unnecessary advance of her acceptance. For example, having assisted a woman to cross the street, he should lift his hat and take his leave immediately." In a section under Shaking Hands, it says, "In shaking hands, there should be a firm, straightforward clasp of the hands, but no strenuous squeezing. Because of the presence of rings on women's fingers, a strong grip may cause severe pain." And under punctuality, it says, "Ladies should never be kept waiting at an appointment. This is particularly true when the rendezvous is in a public place." In 1965, the school's etiquette guide was titled The Art of Good Taste. And I'll share just a short excerpt from a section titled Helping the Ladies. It reads, "What about the lady in distress? Ladies are sometimes extremely independent and will occasionally get themselves into difficulties when they have no escort to assist them. As a gentleman, a cadet cannot ignore the lady in trouble, but how does he speak to a lady he has never met? Let us suppose a cadet sees a lady with a great armload of packages. She is navigating adequately, but she is really burdened. Disaster looms as she approaches the revolving door just ahead. The cadet could very properly approach her and say, 'Excuse me, ma'am, may I help you?' Do not try to take the packages from her until it is obvious that she is willing to accept help. Once safely past the hazard, return her packages to her and leave her immediately. Helping a lady in distress is not the occasion to form a lasting acquaintance." Mrs. Lewis B. Dufour, originally from Clark County, Virginia, was the widow of Citadel faculty member Alfred E. Dufour, who taught modern languages from 1920 until his death in 1954. In 1956, Mrs. Dufour was appointed Citadel hostess, a position she kept until her retirement in July of 1973. The hostess's role was to supervise campus social life by organizing and chaperoning dances and parties, arranging dance lessons for cadets, and making arrangements for the dates and families of cadets to stay in private homes throughout Charleston during their visits. Mrs. Dufour also encouraged cadets to stop by her home to chat when they needed advice or someone to listen to. She passed away in 1995 at the age of 90. When Mrs. Dufour retired, Mrs. Billie Jean Aggie became the new head of the hostess department. An article in the student newspaper, The Brigadier, announced her new appointment, describing the services available through the hostess department, including etiquette workshops, dancing lessons, and social mixers, where cadets were introduced to girls from the Charleston area. When archivists process a collection to be used by researchers, there are usually some papers that are labeled miscellaneous and placed at the end of a collection, not to be thrown away, but not described in a way that researchers know they exist. Just a few weeks ago, I was looking for something in our collection for General Mark Clark, who was president of the Citadel from 1954 to 1965. In the box at the very end of his expansive collection, which was labeled Unprocessed Clark Papers from his Citadel Years, I found a manila envelope that had "My beloved Rennie" written on top. Inside was a small collection of letters and cards from Mark Clark's first wife, Maureen Doran Clark, whom he called Rennie. Maureen Doran Clark was born in 1892 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She met Clark while he was stationed in Washington, D.C., and they married in 1924. Clark's letters to his wife during World War II are rare glimpses of him as a human being, as a father and husband, and not as the four-star general he is best known for. These letters from Maureen to her husband, which I didn't know existed before this month, are loving and kind. In 1956, Maureen Clark published her memoirs titled Captain's Bride, General's Lady. When she died in 1966, among the letters of condolence that Clark received was a telegram from Eisenhower, who said that the news came to him as a shock. Eisenhower wrote, "While words can do little to lighten the burden of grief, we assure you that our hearts in deepest sympathy are with you." Upon news of her death, a tribute was published in the student newspaper, The Brigadier. It reads in part, "She was not a mother to us. That cliche is too mean for her. She did not treat us as sons, because for almost 2 decades, each of us had been amply treated that way. She treated us as some have refused to treat us. She treated us as we were, sometimes almost desperate to prove ourselves. She treated us always as men." Let's move now to Citadel yearbooks and student newspapers, both of which were curated by cadets and include lots of women. Early Citadel yearbooks had a section labeled Beauty, with glamour shots of young women, likely girlfriends of cadets. These are from the 1930 yearbook. The student newspaper, first called the Bulldog and then the Brigadier in 1953, had weekly featured beauties of the week with a picture and description of the young women. Some descriptions included their height and weight. Sponsors of companies, battalions, and athletic teams started appearing in the Citadel yearbooks in the early 20th century. Sponsors supported the Corps by organizing events and serving as hostesses. Many were girlfriends of cadets, but some were also sisters, mothers, grandmothers, or aunts. I think it's fascinating when we're looking through our yearbooks. We see images of Citadel cadets that for the most part stay the same over the years. But when we look at women from different decades, we can see how hair and dress styles change. These are from the 1910, 1923, and 1935 yearbooks. And these are from the 1943, 1952, and 1963 yearbooks. Sponsors appeared to end after the 1970s, and so this is one of the last from 1978. Miss Citadel was a beauty contest held from 1952 through 1996 at the Citadel. Each company had one contestant in the running. The contest was held over a long weekend on campus, sometimes Parents' Weekend and sometimes during homecoming. From records in our archives, it sounds like the 5 semifinalists were chosen by cadet ballot, and then a panel of judges interviewed the finalists and made the final selection. The women had their glamour shots included in the yearbook, and the winner was crowned in a ceremony on campus. A press release was sent to the hometown papers of all of the contestants so they could publish a story and a photograph of their weekend at the Citadel. To get a sense of what it was like to be at the Citadel over the years, sometimes I go to our collection of newspaper clippings in our archives. The Citadel subscribed to a clipping service, which would go through all of the local papers and cut out any article or photograph that mentioned the college. Those would be pasted into scrapbooks, and looking through these from year to year, we see what the headlines were over time. In the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, many of the scrapbooks are full of announcements of weddings and betrothals of Citadel men. The announcements have pictures of their fiancés or brides with a brief description of the nuptials. And so when we look for evidence or for traces of women at the Citadel in these years, what we mostly see are the spouses and fiancés of Citadel men. Citadel hops or dances were big events for the college. Cadets and their dates would plan far in advance. The hostess department on campus would help to make arrangements for their dates to stay comfortably in Charleston and to be sure that the cadets knew how to dance and knew the proper etiquette for dinners and receptions. In 1949, women began taking summer classes at the Citadel. About 60 women attended that first year, and a year later, the number had grown to 130. The female students were coming to the Citadel from Georgetown, Beaufort, Moncks Corner, Walterboro, and elsewhere. An article from August of 1950 said of the program, "The thought of having women attend classes at the Citadel was rather a shock to college authorities." General Summerall was quoted as saying that he had received a letter from about 100 women thanking the Citadel for what it had done for them and remarking on the lack of tension that they experienced in the classroom. However, the general made it clear that there was no thought of coeducation in the Corps of Cadets, which he described as not a harsh place, but a stern place. This is a picture of Captain Paul Nickerson teaching a summer class in Education for American Democracy for a room full of women. Captain Nickerson was quoted as saying that he was impressed by his female students and said that they were very friendly. He said that most of the women had children of their own and approached the work from the viewpoint of a teacher and parents, saying that such an attitude added unusual interest since one who has children of her own will normally be more understanding of other people's children. The article ends with, "And yet the staid old institution, which has catered to men exclusively for more than a century, has lost none of its military dignity, even though the strange sound of feminine laughter can be heard up and down the corridors." In the fall of 1966, Charles Foster desegregated the Corps as the first African-American cadet. This is a photograph from the Citadel's 1967 yearbook showing Charles Foster walking with his mother, Blanche. Behind them are his grandmother, Naomi DeLeslin, and his mother's close friend, Liz McCrae. Charles Foster graduated in 1970 after serving in the Army, moved to Texas. In 1986, he was killed in a house fire in Texas. When I joined the Citadel as archivist, I soon realized that we did not have enough information to help researchers understand who Charles Foster was or what his experience at the Citadel might have been like. We started a project in 2018 called Charles Foster and the Black Experience to begin recording interviews about Foster and to collect images, reflections, and stories of Foster for our archives. The first interview that we recorded was with Foster's older brother, William Foster, who described their family, their childhood, and talked about what he knew of his brother's cadet years. In that interview, William Foster described his mother and grandmother as strong, independent women who raised him and his brother with the idea that they could do anything they set their minds to, even as they grew up during segregation. And so I am going to play just a short, a 2-minute clip, audio clip from that interview.
Well, first let me say that my parents did a good job of kind of insulating Charles and I from the reality of the times, and that making sure that we felt we could do anything we wanted to through education. We felt safe in the borders of our home, but when we went out, they prepared us for the realities that living in a separate but unequal society. And they were all over Charleston. You would see signs saying whites only. You see water fountains for color. They didn't use the term black then, it was colored. Or some that thought they were liberal, they would say Negroes, but the term we most often used was colored. For colored only, for whites only. There were restaurants that would not serve you. There were some restaurants that if you wanted to really eat, they'd tell you to come to the back. We never subscribed to that. We never felt like we were second-class citizens, so we didn't, and how you think about things is how your parents prepare you, is how you go on to life. That's why I think it's so important early in children's lives to have a good foundation, because the foundation they gave us prepared us for the rest of our lives. And that's what Charles took with him when he went on his journey, and that's what I took when I left the house and I decided to strike on my own. We really had no fear of not being successful, because we felt like if we given an opportunity, we were going to do what we needed to do. And that's what Charles and I shared coming up in the 50s and 60s.
Norman Seabrooks was in the Citadel's class of 1973. A football player, he was the first African-American athlete for the Corps. We have a series of interviews with Mr. Seabrooks that you can watch on our archives website, and we'll be adding more to the collection this summer. In one interview, he describes how awkward it was at Citadel dances in the 1960s and 70s for young Black cadets who were required to attend the dances, but could not socialize or dance with the white women who were invited to meet cadets. The story that I will share this evening from one of Norm Seabrook's interviews is of Mr. Seabrook's mother. And I'm going to play just a short 5-minute clip from that interview.
My parents really loved the idea of me going to college and playing football. And, we lived in our small town about a 6-hour drive from Charleston. So there was a part of me that really anticipated them coming to games and watching me play. But my dad worked 7 days a week during the football season because that was the harvesting time for sugar canes, so he could never get away. And my brother also worked for the same company, so he was also working 7 days a week. But one day, I got a call from my mom saying that she had convinced my brother to take the weekend one, and he was going to drive her to Charleston to see a football game because she wanted to watch me play. And so they got there on a Friday night, and we met friends and had dinner. And that Saturday, it was gone to the game, and I had gotten my family tickets, and they were sitting on the Citadel side of the field, near cadets, but where families of cadets were sitting. And a few people recognized that when I went over to see my mom and waved to her, they recognized that she was my mother. And so the game started, and we were playing Boston University. Now, Boston had not a great football team. I remember they were not one of the big powerhouses, but they had a lot of press and a lot of local press in Charleston taking on, a real, I think, dislike for them, because they assumed that Boston was bragging about how good they were because they had 4 African-American players on their team playing in the secondary. They were, the 4 secondary men were all Black, and they called themselves the Soul Patrol. And it got a lot of press prior to the game. Well, you can imagine how that went over in Charleston in 1972. It was not well received. And by the time the game had started, and after a tailgate party, I assume many of the parents were quite well lubricated with the beverage of their choice. And they began screaming and yelling at the players the moment the game started. And my brother was sitting there, and he said, suddenly I hear this, these screams coming from behind us, and people were screaming, kill the N-words. And that went on from the moment the game started until the moment the game ended. He said, that's all you heard. They were yelling for the words. And someone I think he said about the third quarter, said to one of his friends, "Oh, that's Norm Seabrook's mom sitting down there." And he says, "What about Norm? Isn't he getting one of the N-words?" And the guy said, "Yes, but he's ours, and he's okay." And so when the game ended, I got dressed. I went, took a shower, got dressed, and was going out with my family to have dinner. And my mom met me by the back gate where the dressing room was in the stadium. And she looked flustered. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Oh, we have to go." And I said, "What do you mean you have to go?" And she said, "We have to go." And my brother said, she wants to get home. It's a 6-hour drive. And it was early afternoon. We can be home by late night. And she's supposed to get home and make sure Dad's okay. So it seems odd, but it was okay. And they left. And so I didn't hear a thing about, the game. My mom said she enjoyed watching me play. And then I went home for Thanksgiving. And I remember I came in the house and I sat down at the kitchen table with my mom. We were just chatting about something. And she started to cry. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she says, "I am so sorry." I said, "Sorry about what?" She said, "I am so sorry. We left you in that place. And you went through all the things you went through. What are you talking about?" I thought she was referring to my freshman year. I said, "Mom, that was 2 years ago. I'm okay. They leave me alone." And she says, "No." And she said, "I'm just sorry that they treat you so badly." I said, "Mom, they're not." And so she wouldn't tell me what was going on. So I asked my brother what happened. And he said, "She saw you at the game and she heard what they were screaming at the other players. And she heard them saying the N-word out loud and kill them. And he said it got to her and she cried the entire way home. She cried because she thought, I can't believe we left our son in that environment." And that's when I realized what had transpired. And I asked her, I said, "Mom, that doesn't happen all the time." And I said, "It's kind of a unique experience." And she said, "I will never go there again." And for the rest of my career, including graduation, my mom never set foot on that campus again.
And you can watch Norm Seabrook's interviews on our archives website. In 1965, the first female African-American students took summer classes at the Citadel. Their names were Paris Maxwell, Jeanette Washington, Alice Middleton, Bertha McFall, and Helen Rand. In 1968, the Citadel's graduate program began, and in 1970, the first women received degrees as part of this program. Maxine Hudson was the first woman to finish her requirements towards her master's degree at the Citadel, having completed her coursework in December of 1969. I conducted a short interview with Ms. Hudson for an article 2 years ago, and she told me that the Citadel was very gracious when she received her degree, but at the commencement ceremony, they didn't know what to do with a bunch of women who were kind of like aliens to everyone at the Citadel. And Ms. Hudson, unfortunately, passed away just last year. Eileen Mahan, the Citadel's first full-time female professor, joined the Citadel in 1974 as a member of the Department of Education and moved to the psychology department when it was established. In 1988, she became the first woman to achieve the rank of colonel at the Citadel. Dr. Mahan retired in 1991 after 17 years of service. Originally from Derby, Connecticut, she had worked at public schools in Connecticut and taught as an associate professor of psychology at Central Connecticut State University before moving to Charleston. And Dr. Mahan passed away in 2004. Dr. Marlene O'Brien Seabrook was born in Newbury, South Carolina. Both of her parents were educators. Dr. Seabrook had been teaching in Columbia, South Carolina, when a new program came about called Diagnostic Prescriptive Teaching, where teachers would be trained to work with students who had special needs. The training she received for that program was held at the Citadel. After her training, Dr. Seabrook became a coordinator for the program and was appointed as an adjunct professor in 1972. In 1975, she was appointed to a full-time teaching position in the education department at the Citadel, becoming the college's first full-time female African-American professor. After the Citadel, Dr. O'Brien Seabrook continued her career with the Charleston County School District. Also a world-renowned artist, Dr. O'Brien Seabrook began quilting in the 1980s and was one of 44 artists selected to create works commemorating the inauguration of President Barack Obama. An oral history was recorded with Dr. O'Brien Seabrook in 2013, during which she described what it was like to be the first female African-American professor at the Citadel and one of only 2 female professors at the time. She said that overall, she had a wonderful experience at the Citadel. In her interview, she shared a funny story of how the Citadel did not change the language and its written invitations for herself or for Dr. Mahan. And so when they received formal invitations to events where their spouses were expected to attend, they would be invited to bring their ladies with them. And this is a short excerpt from her interview, just 2 minutes long.
Now, my husband is retired Army Lieutenant Colonel. He got the most fun out of being my lady. It was so, but when the Board of Visitors would have oyster roasts or parties, or the president would have parties, and we were invited. At that time, he was working in Orangeburg, and he would come up at any time. He called them command performances. That's from his military life. So anytime I had a command appearance, he would come. And so he would dress and he would say, your lady is almost ready, It's got to be an in-house joke with us. And then Prince Charles of England was the guest on campus once. And there was reserved seating for the spouses of the faculty because we were in academic regalia. We had to march in. And it was, Art just had more fun because there he was, the only African-American man in this sea. You think this looks like the sea of Caucasian women. Wanted to tell him that he didn't belong there. They didn't know, and so he really thought that he had missed where he was supposed to go. And so finally one of them said, this is, this is reserved for the spouses of Citadel faculty. And so Art said, you just said, yes, and so she didn't want to say anymore. And then we started coming in. And then all of a sudden they spotted me. And then he said, then he became, he said, I became the belle of the ball. He said, everybody was, what, that's your one? That kind of thing. But there were some funny experiences simply because it's hard to change to accommodate one or two people.
And Dr. O'Brien Seabrook's oral history is also available through our website. The Citadel Faculty Wives Club was organized in 1950 with the stated purpose of promoting social contracts among the faculty and furthering the interests of the Citadel. According to the Constitution, faculty includes the administrative staff as well as academic and military officers. Wives of new Citadel faculty members were exempt from paying dues for the first year. The group hosted Citadel functions, raised money for scholarships and local charities, and organized social gatherings. We have some wonderful scrapbooks and photos in our archives documenting their activities. The Faculty Wives Club became known as the Citadel Women's Club in later years. One of their projects was to publish a cookbook titled Seasoned at the Citadel in 1986 with entries from their membership. Included are appetizers, breads, desserts, main dishes, soups, salads, and vegetables. There are recipes for lemon squares, chocolate mousse, Texas honey cake, shrimp casserole, mushroom soup, and much more. Within some of the Citadel's yearbooks and student newspapers, there are crude, insensitive, racist, and sexist cartoons, photographs, and comments. Some of these images have been published in recent years by local papers, and these are just a few examples. The Citadel's yearbooks were first published in 1900, and the student newspapers in 1924, and all are available to view in the Daniel Library. In 1990, the U.S. Education Department filed a discrimination lawsuit against the Virginia Military Institute for its all-male admissions policy. Through the first half of the 1900s, the Citadel and VMI would both fight lengthy, expensive battles to remain single gender. In June of 1992, 3 female veterans commenced action against the Citadel in the lawsuit Johnson versus Jones, seeking admittance to day classes at the Citadel. The school had not allowed women to attend day classes before, and in response to this lawsuit, made the decision to terminate the policy of allowing any veterans, male or female, to day classes, rendering their lawsuit moot. In 1994, Shannon Ritchie Faulkner from Powdersville, South Carolina, became the first woman to take day classes at the Citadel. Ms. Faulkner's history with the college began in November of 1992 when she applied for admission to the Citadel's Corps of Cadets. Her application was constructed so that any mention of her gender was not included, and she was given a provisional acceptance. When the Citadel learned of her gender, her acceptance was revoked. In March of 1993, Shannon Faulkner instituted an action claiming the Citadel's failure to admit her to the Corps of Cadets violated her equal protection rights guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. In January of 1994, Shannon Faulkner became the first female student to take day classes at the Citadel. She took classes full-time for 3 semesters until the court ruled in 1995 that she was to join the Corps. Throughout the years that Ms. Faulkner fought the legal battle for coeducation, she said that the stress, emotions, and threats against herself and her family left her too emotionally drained to remain at the Citadel, and she left the Corps just a few days after joining. And if you would like to learn more about Faulkner's experience, there is a biography of her titled In Glory's Shadow, Shannon Faulkner, the Citadel in a Changing America, and that's by Catherine S. Manigault. During this time, the media was a constant presence on campus, and there were signs and protests greeting visitors at the front gates. One campaign was called Save the Males and is described as a positive way to express support for the Citadel during its highly publicized battle to remain all male. The slogan was a registered trademark, and profits from sales of bumper stickers, t-shirts, and other merchandise were shared with the Citadel's Legal Defense Fund. On January 26, 1996, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the VMI case in a 7-1 decision that it was unconstitutional for a school supported by public funds to exclude women. This ruling compelled the Citadel to officially change its admissions policy to admit women. In the fall of 1996, 4 women entered the 4th class. After the first semester, 2 of those women left the Citadel, alleging hazing and sexual harassment. The media had been carefully watching the Citadel, and so their stories quickly made it to the Washington Post and New York Times. Among the allegations made, the 2 female cadets said that their clothes had been doused with nail polish remover and set on fire while they were wearing them, that they were made to drink alcohol, forced to stand in a closet while being kicked and shoved, and received threats of violence. One male cadet was dismissed after these incidents were investigated, 3 resigned, and others were given punishments. In 1999, Nancy Mace became the first woman to graduate from the Corps of Cadets. Mace, today a congresswoman representing South Carolina's 1st congressional district, grew up in Goose Creek, South Carolina. And to learn more about her cadet experience, you can check out her autobiography, which is titled In the Company of Men, A Woman at the Citadel. Petra Lovatinska became the 2nd female graduate of the Corps. Lovatinska was born in the Czech Republic. In 1992, when she was 14 years old, her family came to America. Her father was a driver for the Czech embassy. She learned English and lived in the DC area. When the Citadel announced that it would admit women to the Corps, Citadel alumni were instrumental in recruiting Ms. Lovatinska and raised money for her tuition. As a senior at the Citadel, Ms. Lovatinska decided that she wanted to join the Marines, but she was not a U.S. citizen. She became one of only a handful of people in the history of the United States to receive their citizenship as a special act of Congress. For the 1997-1998 school year, a plan was put into action to prepare the college to be successful with its move from single-gender education. These are a few of the items identified as necessary: the recruitment of female cadets, sexual harassment training for students, faculty, and staff, latches on the doors and blinds of female cadet rooms for privacy, female restrooms to be added to the barracks, gender-neutral terms in Citadel publications and for the Alumni Association, which at the time was called the Association of Citadel Men. In 1997, 2 women, Allison Dean Love and Ann Eilish, were selected to serve on the Citadel's Board of Visitors as advisory members. In 2000, the South Carolina General Assembly elected Allison Dean Love as the first woman to serve as a voting member of the Citadel's board. Love has been re-elected 3 times since then, and today remains the only woman to serve on our Board of Visitors. The first woman to serve as a dean at the Citadel was Suzanne Osmond. Osmond earned her bachelor's and master's degrees at Eastern Carolina University and her PhD from the University of South Carolina. She joined the Citadel in 1982 as a faculty member in the English department. In 1997, she was named Dean of Undergraduate Studies and Dean of Women. An article in the Christian Science Monitor dated August 25th, 1997 reads, "Even the academic courses will change." Suzanne Osmond, the Dean of Women and Dean of Undergraduate Studies, has begun a review of the entire curriculum to make sure women's achievements are adequately represented. She also plans to bring more women on campus for educational presentations and to make the faculty aware of current teaching techniques that may be unsuitable for co-ed classes. Patricia McCarver was the Citadel's first vice president, serving as a VP of communications from 2002 to 2005. She then served as director for the Oral Communications Lab until 2013, and also served as interim vice president for external affairs. On April 14th, 2016, the Oral Communications Lab was dedicated as the Patricia McCarver Public Speaking Lab. Dr. Constance, or Connie Book, was the first female provost for the Citadel. Before joining the Citadel, Dr. Book was a faculty member at Elon University for 16 years and was named Associate Dean of their School of Education. She was provost of the Citadel from 2015 to 2018, and then left Charleston to become the first female president of Elon University. In a January 22nd, 2020 article for Diverse Issues in Higher Education, Dr. Book said of the Citadel, "I thought it would be exciting to be a first, that it would be an important adventure. I recognize that when I'm working, there's a lot of visibility to it because of the gender being the first. People are watching, particularly other women and female students. It's a great opportunity, and it also comes with that added responsibility." The Citadel's cheerleaders in the 1960s were primarily female students from the College of Charleston. In 2001, the Citadel had 81 female cadets, and the school decided to recruit their own cheerleading squad from that group. The cheerleaders from the College of Charleston who were cheering the Citadel Bulldogs that year asked for permission to stay on as cheerleaders until they graduated. But in a response from the Citadel's athletics director, Les Robinson, he told them that they were welcome to be Citadel cheerleaders if they transferred into the Corps. Mandy Garcia from Fayetteville, North Carolina, was the first female athlete to join the Corps of Cadets. Ms. Garcia was 18 years old when she matriculated in August of 1997. She joined the Citadel with a partial athletic scholarship to run cross country. She ran as an individual competitor as she had no team members to join her. When Ms. Garcia returned as a sophomore the following year, she was asked to give advice to incoming female cadets. She said, "Make sure you try to be 50% better than everyone else, just so you can fit in the middle. You always want to make sure you look 10 times better so you can look average." When she started in the fall of 1997, Garcia had a locker room to herself in Vandiver Hall, the former visitors' locker room. By the 1998-1999 season, the Citadel's female volleyball team was organized. An article in the student newspaper that year said, "They are young in age and as a team. Every member of the team is less than 20 years old, the youngest member having turned 17 only a short time ago. As a team, they are still in the initial building phase, trying to learn from each other's style in order to become a more formidable opponent." An article from November of 1998 in the student newspaper read, "It is encouraging to see the team play well together. The team really communicated well and showed a stronger sense of team unity." After the game, the volleyball team took the opportunity to talk with a group of local middle school children that came out for the game. It was a nice opportunity for the ladies to take pride in the school and in the new program. In 2002, the Citadel finished a $900,000 addition to McAllister Fieldhouse, which provided women's coaching offices and locker rooms. And by 2004, the Citadel had 75 female athletes competing in 7 sports. In recent years, we have had many firsts to celebrate with women in the Corps. I have some of these here, but there are many more to document and many stories to collect from all of the remarkable women who attend the Citadel. Here we have Dana Abrash, class of 2001, who was the first female editor of the student newspaper, The Brigadier, and the first piper in the Citadel's pipe band. We also have Mandy Garcia, who was not only our first female student athlete, but also the first female regimental executive officer. In 2002, the Citadel saw its first cohort of female African-American graduates from the Corps. Recently, the number of female African-American graduates passed 100. Here we have Amanda Orson, class of 2003, who was the first female battalion commander, and Vion Bullock, class of 2004, who was the first female member of the Honor Corps. And here we have Hunter Crawley, class of 2019, who was the first female drum major, and Bailey Richardson, class of 2020, who was the first woman to be awarded the Star of the West Scholarship. Sarah Zorn, class of 2019, was the Citadel's first female regimental commander, the highest ranking cadet in the Corps. Ms. Zorn grew up in Zephyr Hills, Florida, and moved to Aiken, South Carolina when she was 16. The Citadel was attractive to her because she knew that she wanted to serve in the Army and to study engineering. It was actually the only school that she applied to. Ms. Zorn said in an interview in 2019 that being regimental commander taught her that you have to work as a team to get things done, and about the importance of being transparent, open, and willing to have conversations with people. She said that she had two main goals as regimental commander. The first was to mend the relationship between the Corps and student athletes. She saw a separation between the two and worked with regimental XO David Days to promote greater understanding between the two. The second was to paint the Citadel in a positive light. Anytime she had the opportunity to speak on a public platform, she did her best to represent the school to move its mission forward. Catherine Christmas, class of 2022, was the second female regimental commander. Catherine's junior year at the Citadel was disrupted due to the COVID pandemic, and so one of her main goals as regimental commander was to make the Corps feel like a family again. Catherine was a NOM, or a freshman, during Sarah's senior year as regimental commander. In a panel discussion that was held for Women's History Month just last week, Catherine shared what it meant to see Sarah in that position. She said, "I had somebody to look up to. It's already been done. That means I can do it too. It's not something that's way out there, way out of my league. It's something that we can all achieve. It made me believe that I can achieve something that makes me bigger than myself." So we have come a very long way. There are many more stories to be discovered, to be collected, and to be created by women today and women to come. So thank you so much for listening this evening. Please feel free to reach out to me in the archives if you have any questions, or if you would like to get involved in collecting, preserving, and sharing the stories of women at the Citadel. And I'm going to check our Q&A to see if we have any questions that have come in. And it looks like we have some comments, but not questions. So I know that we have been online together for a long time this evening. We will send out an email to everyone who registered for this presentation with a recording of the presentation and a brief survey so you can share your thoughts with us. In that survey, we will ask you what aspects of women's history at the Citadel you would like to learn about. So please take that opportunity to, in a sense, commission research for our next presentation. And I'm just taking one last look here. So we have a one question, which is, where was the first laundry building at the new Citadel? Thank you for that question. The first laundry building was actually located in the temporary powerhouse which was built in 1920, 1921. It's in the same location now, down by the marsh, but it was in that building. And we do have architectural drawings from that building. And so if that's something that you're interested in learning more about, or about the history of laundry at the Citadel in general, please reach out to me through the archives. You can find my email address on our website, and I'm happy to share more about that. All right, well, I hope that everyone has a wonderful, wonderful evening, and we will share the recording with you probably just tomorrow with that survey, and we'd be happy to hear from you and to learn, what you are interested in with Citadel history. Thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.